Okay.
It was cool. It was cool. And then the 1967 riots came up.
Mm-hmm.
And I was recruited by Chrysler Corporation because they needed to get some more of us into the workplace there.
Yeah. After that, yeah.
Because
we got to get some black people in here.
That's what was happening.
Yeah, hey.
And the
real.
funny thing about it was I was being interviewed for the job. And there must have been at least...
What job?
For a foreman.
Mm-hmm.
And there were at least 10 of us in the room interviewing for that job.
Mm-hmm.
And I was the only one of us in that room. And I said to myself, oh, Lord.
Yeah. It's like you and 9 white guys. This doesn't even seem like it's a fair shot.
So at lunchtime, after we signed up everything and took whatever we needed to do, they sent everybody to lunch.
Mm-hmm.
And he told me, oh, come back when you finish eating. I said, oh, you're getting ready to tell me something now. Because he didn't say nothing to nobody else. When I came back, bingo, you're hired.
How long did you stay at Chrysler?
I stayed at Chrysler for 15 years. 14 or 15 years.
Okay.
Because since I'd never been an industrial employee, they put me for 90 days. I had to go on the line.
Yeah, I was going to say, you didn't really have a lot of experience in that. But you did understand machines because the bowling alley,
yeah, right.
The post office.
So to know what I was doing, they put me on the line to actually do it, too, with the crew. So I enjoyed it. So it was supposed to be for 90 days, but after 60 days, they came and got me and said, okay, we're ready. You ready for what? We're ready to take you over and you start. So I became a line foreman.
Which plant?
At the 8 Mile Mound.
8 Mile and Mound.
8 Mile and Mound.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Still pumping today. That's anybody that knows they drive down 8 Mile going east at a particular time, you're gonna be mad because that plant right there will have a train. have you at a railroad crossing for about 30 minutes. You'd be like,
and
I hate the east side.
And then after I'd been a foreman for about 4 years, his name was Austin. He worked for Chrysler Learning, and he was Secretary of State's Austin's grandson, I believe. And he would see me as a foreman working. I like what you're doing. We got to know each other, and he said, hey, I'm going to recommend you to my boss, till you come over and work with us on the learning. So he got me hired over there, and where we were teaching welding, and first the kids would come in, kids or adults, whatnot, give them classroom education on certain, if they didn't know this or that or the other, would find out because they would be finding out what they know. And so we had teachers that would give them certain instruction, and then we'd find out what kind of crafts were they interested in.
Okay, now when you say Chrysler Learning, we kind of got to go back to the root of this. So at one point in time, Chrysler had its own educational facilities for people that have been hired in to expand their knowledge base or to just give them skills so that they can continue to work in Chrysler. So was it like one of those things where it's like, we'll teach you, but we're teaching you so you can be a better employee? Or was it like, we'll just teach you what you want to know?
What happened is, after the 1967 riots, Lynn Townsend, who was the chairman of the board, went to Washington, D.C., and got them to give some millions of dollars to Chrysler to open up the Chrysler Learning facilities that they did.
Okay, so it was subsidized by the government, this Chrysler Learning facility. Where was it at?
Well, they had a lot of
facilities.
They had a LeMay training center for the school, for the kids to come in or the adults to get classroom training. They had the LeMay Center, and then they had the Hoover Road Industrial Center where they had certain, welding or certain other. So it had several sites. They had a Holland Park Center, and so quite a few places.
Okay.
Doing a lot of stuff.
And you were working with, what center did you work with?
I worked out of the LeMay Center and Hoover because I was one of the, we were doing, after they graduated, we were communicating with the businesses around the metropolitan area, and we would get jobs for them.
Okay, so they didn't even necessarily have to end up working for Chrysler.
Yeah.
So it was really like a vocational school, subsidized by the government, led by Chrysler.
Some would stay at Chrysler, and some would. But by the time that I was with them for about...
It seems like a lot of people will be going through that program thinking like, I know I'm going to get a job with Chrysler when I'm done with this because it's a Chrysler school. I know that's what I'd be thinking.
Once they became... When they got the trade that they were going to fill, some of them would earn more money going into another facility than Chrysler.
Okay.
So it was good for them. It was good. And good. We placed about, in the period of time, about 50,000 people into different classifications.
Okay. How long did you do that?
For about 10 years.
Okay. So that was really your first 4 years were foreman, and then the other 10 years were working in that school. So that was your first taste of interacting with education.
That's right. That's right.
Something.
Because I saw what was happening out in the streets, that too many were on a pipeline to prison.
Yeah, the streets are hiring.
Because the schools were not giving them good training. They were not giving them good art, music, science, vocational.
What years were this? Because I always hear these the glory stories of like what existed with, like, I'm a Northwestern graduate, of what was at Northwestern in the 60s. What years was this?
Well, that was the same thing that the same things that Dr. Martin Luther King was talking about. He was talking about the crisis in education, and that there was so much discrimination at that time.
I agree, but you realize it's also a narrative of like the romanticizing of what DPS was in that era. So even then, it was still supplemental resources that were needed to assist. And really, I think the number one thing that you all did was you all had a specific job placement center so that now the students can be placed into jobs with the skill sets. Because maybe even that job placement center should just be applicable to every school everywhere, and then it can provide those resources that some of these other systems could provide.
Right.
Okay.
That's why when I got elected to the Board of Education, and back in the 1970s, 1974, I believe. And one of the first things, busing was an issue then. Busing, and while busing was finalized, I was the legislative chairperson. I would work with the legislators, and I encouraged them to get vocational centers for Detroit.
Okay, so I didn't know that you were on the school board even in the 70s as well. I thought your recent run was
10 years on the board. 10 years
in the 70s. So during that time that you were on the school board and leaving Chrysler, what were you doing at the time?
Well, what I had at Chrysler, I was making good money.
Yeah, I feel you. I'm sure that the Chrysler was not interested in actually opening up schools, but that money probably incentivized them, so they needed to incentivize their team.
My brother was a principal at Coffee Middle School at that time.
Coffee Middle School. I have never even heard of it. Where is Coffee?
Coffee is between Greenfield and Southfield, and it's probably closed now. It's just is north of 7 Mile. It may have been closed by now.
Okay, so basically that Henry Ford High School area, sort of.
Back in there, yeah,
Okay,
back in
yeah,
there.
Yeah.
And I encouraged him to. I was on the board, and I said, our kids need places to go for good, safe, wholesome recreation.
Black revolutionaries, distillery owners, Italian fashion retailers, and Motown Grammy winners all share their best stories never before told in any other media outlets on Detroit is Different. Visit DetroitisDifferent.com or download the Detroit is Different app on Apple's App Store or Google's Play Store.